Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to take you through a deep dive into one of the most dramatic strikes in the energy war between Russia and Ukraine. A strike so impactful that some reports have called it $2 billion gone in flames. Ukraine's deadly strike cripples Russia's oil supply. Let's begin by setting the stage for why an attack on oil infrastructure matters so much. Russia's war machine depends heavily on energy. Fuel for vehicles, aircraft, ships, and logistical support all require oil and refined petroleum products. Hitting oil depots, refineries, and pipelines doesn't just scorch concrete and metal, it disrupts supplies, raises transport costs, causes cascading shortages, and forces the adversary to divert resources to recovery and defense. Over the past year, Ukraine has increasingly turned its gaze from frontline military targets toward critical energy infrastructure deep inside Russian-held territory or even within Russia itself. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty +1 now. Imagine a massive strike. Tanks of fuel exploding in fireballs, storage facilities reduced to smoldering ruins, and billions of dollars in losses. That is exactly what is evoked by the $2 billion in flames framing. Although the precise sum is debated, the symbolism is powerful. A concentrated blow to Russia's oil holdings that aims to undermine not just immediate supplies, but Russia's ability to project force, sustain operations, and export energy revenue. Let's unpack what's actually known. First, the scale and targets. Between September 2024 and February 2025, Ukraine reportedly struck 27 times at Russian oil and gas infrastructure, 14 oil storage facilities, 9 refineries, 2 pumping stations, and a few gas storage or processing sites. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty analysts reviewing satellite imagery counted nearly 97 storage tanks, either damaged or destroyed. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Depending on how full those tanks were and crude oil prices at the time, the damage per tank could range from tens of millions to nearly $100 million. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty 1, particularly notable strike was on an oil depot in Feodosia, where 11 tanks with a combined capacity of 69,000 cubic meters were hit. The worst-case estimated damage to that one facility might exceed $39 million. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, then there are the refineries. Damaging a storage tank is bad. Damaging a refinery that turns crude into gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, or other petroleum products is even more damaging. The cumulative losses to refineries and storage sites over that period were estimated at 59.4 billion Russian rubles, roughly 707 million. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, including further losses from a disrupted gas refinery hub at Astrakhan, total possible damage could rise to about 77.9 billion rubles, 927 million. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Meanwhile, Russia's oil export revenues in 2024 were estimated at $189 billion. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. So while the strikes are significant, Russia's oil industry is still very large. These attacks are erosion, not collapse. Still, the effects are cumulative. Russia reportedly reduced gasoline exports in early 2024 to protect its domestic market, after a 15% hit to refining capacity forced it to prioritize internal consumption. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty analysts believe these attacks increase pressure on Russia's logistical chains. Fuel has to travel farther, storage becomes unpredictable, and repair efforts become riskier. Sky News +1. In many cases, the damaged tanks aren't immediately rebuilt, for a mix of reasons: fear of repeat strikes, sanctions limiting access to materials or equipment, or simply a calculation that repairing them isn't worth the cost right now. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Another factor, Ukrainian drone capabilities have improved. Analysts tracking the tempo of drone strikes found a clear rise in attacks on Russian oil depots and related facilities over recent months. Sky News. Some sources suggest Ukraine is increasing its drone production and pushing the operational envelope of range, accuracy, and payload. Sky News. This allows Ukraine to reach deeper into Russian territory, strike critical nodes, and complicate Russian defensive deployments. Sky News plus one. But what about the 2 billion figure? That might be a dramatic framing, perhaps tied to damage across many sites, compensation claims, or larger projected ripple effects. Some other attacks outside this window have been reported in news outlets. For example, a drone strike in Rostov Oblast reportedly destroyed $200 million worth of fuel in one depot. Newsweek that shows the magnitude possible in a single facility, adding credence to large aggregate sums. So, is the claim valid? Partially. The claim of $2 billion may be on the high side for a single strike, but spread across multiple successive attacks, the damage certainly runs into the high hundreds of millions or more. The point isn't perfect arithmetic, but the strategic message. Ukraine is hitting Russia's energy backbone, not just lightly tapping it. Now let's talk about ripple effects and strategic implications. First, supply disruptions. Destroying storage tanks and refineries reduces immediate capacity for holding and processing fuel. That forces Russia to move fuel from more distant sites, increasing transport costs, stretching pipelines or rail capacity, and raising vulnerability during transit. These disruptions slow down resupply to the front and make fuel more costly for the Russian military. Analysts suggest Russian aviation, bombers, jets, transport aircraft, might struggle to source fuel reliably. Sky News plus 1 second. Increased risk and cost of recovery. Repairing oil infrastructure requires materials, skilled labor, specialized equipment, and obviously security against further attacks. Under sanctions, Russia's access to some machinery or replacement parts may be limited. Also, any rebuilding effort now becomes a target risk again, so Russia may delay or ration repairs. As one analysis put it, the majority of these damaged tanks are not replaced or repaired. Russian oil companies are likely in no hurry. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty third. Export constraints. If Russia loses refining capacity or storage hubs near ports, its capacity to export refined petroleum products, not only crude, gets squeezed. Coupled with Western sanctions on Russian oil, these strikes can compound pressure on Russia's energy earnings. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty plus one. Some observers argue that the energy infrastructure attacks amplify the effect of sanctions. Sky News plus 1/4, strategic signaling. These strikes send a message. No part of Russia's energy network is safe. That forces Russia to divert resources into defensive systems, anti-drone deployment, early warning, and dispersion strategies rather than focusing purely on offensive operations. This imposes an opportunity cost. The psychological effect also matters, showing capability, resolve, and reach. Ukraine demonstrates it can strike deep, hit high-value nodes, and make strikes count. However, there are limits and counterpoints to consider. One is scale. Russia's oil sector is huge, with redundancy, distribution networks, and multiple hubs. Damaging a few nodes or even tens of tanks hurts, but may not cripple overall capacity. The industry may absorb losses, reroute, and draw upon reserves or unhit infrastructure. Another is the cost-effectiveness of drone strikes. Drones, especially small ones, carry limited payloads. To destroy a large refinery segment requires multiple hits or precise engineering. Some analysts caution that drone attacks might struggle to inflict catastrophic damage to refinery cores. Sky News. Also, some attacks may do more cosmetic damage than structural cripplement. Third, attribution, timing, and intelligence. High-value strikes require good intelligence on where fuel is stored, when refineries are operating, and how heavily protected each site is. Mistakes or intelligence gaps risk wasted missions or exposure. Also, weather, defenses, or luck can intervene. Fourth, reciprocal risk. By targeting energy infrastructure, Ukraine may invite heavier retaliatory strikes on Ukrainian energy, civilian areas, or logistics lines. The escalation risk is real. Fifth, global energy prices. If Ukraine starts hitting Russia's oil infrastructure more deeply, global oil markets could feel shockwaves, supply tightens, prices rise, ripple effects hit other nations. Major powers may pressure Ukraine or Russia diplomatically to limit strikes that could upset energy markets. Indeed, some sources say the U.S. has asked Ukraine not to strike refineries to avoid pushing global oil prices higher. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. So where does that leave us in assessing this $2 billion style title? It's a provocative framing, but its purpose is less about perfect accounting and more about illustrating how energy warfare has become a front in this conflict. The data supports the notion that successive Ukrainian strikes have caused hundreds of millions in direct damage, and potentially more when factoring in lost output, repair delays, and strategic disruption. The $2 billion may be an upper estimate or symbolic summation across multiple waves of damage. As with many things in war, precision is elusive. Narratives are important, and symbolic framing amplifies strategic messaging. What makes this story compelling is not just the number, but the shift in Ukraine's strategy. From defending, to daring retaliation, to targeting the enemy's economic sinews, Ukraine is challenging the assumption that Russia's hinterland is safe, that energy nodes are sacrosanct, and that war is confined to front lines. In closing, here are a few takeaways. Attacks on energy infrastructure aren't glamorous, but they can be deeply disruptive. Fuel is the lifeblood of modern militaries. The scale and accumulation of high,